Please come together, everybody. All right, we shall begin. Good morning, or should I say, good afternoon almost. My name is Luis Garden Acosta, and normally I represent El Puente, a human rights-driven community and youth leadership movement in North Brooklyn. But today, we, all of us, represent the Hispanic Federation, Latino and allied public officials, and community leaders, all together to say that Puerto Rico matters. Puerto Rican citizens are U.S. citizens. We are treating them, America is treating them badly. We want to say to the President of the United States, Mr. Obama, in so many words, you have said to Puerto Rico and its U.S. citizens, all of whom are U.S. citizens by birth, to drop dead. That is inappropriate. It is inappropriate for the federal government to approach our island from a perspective of Jim Crow third-class citizenship. It is inappropriate not to offer Puerto Rico the very rights that Detroit has, that any city, any major community in the United States has. Puerto Rico may be an unincorporated territory of the United States, some say a booty of the Spanish-American War, but we are U.S. American citizens and demand to be treated as such. So we're going to talk about the $72 to $74 billion debt today, and we're going to talk about how the president must act on behalf of U.S. citizens in Puerto Rico. And first up, is someone I am so proud, as a Puerto Rican, as a Dominican, to present. We share a common commitment to young people in her leadership with Lorraine Cortez Vasquez of Aspira in another life. We, of course, are committed, all of us, Latinos, to the iconic capital of Latino New York, East Harlem, which she represents. And I am so proud to say, among the Puerto Rican diaspora and in Puerto Rico, the first Latina speaker of the City Council, Melissa Mark Viverito.
I want to thank Luis Garden Acosta. I want to thank everyone that is here today representing labor. We're going to hear from our mayor as well. We have our public advocate, Tish James, and so many other colleagues of mine that will also join us from the Assembly and the Senate as well. They will be recognized. So I just want to say buenos dias. As we all know, New York is home to one of the largest Puerto Rican populations in the country, and many of us still have family living on the island, as I do. We're raising our collective voice and calling on the federal government to act now to help solve the dire crisis impacting our Puerto Rican brothers and sisters before it is too late. It is very disheartening that the U.S. government is turning a blind eye toward the grave situation in Puerto Rico. The Obama administration and the Congress cannot continue to ignore this crisis. President Obama needs to directly speak to us as a community. He needs to directly speak to the government of Puerto Rico and its people to explain why he's not taking action. And even more, he needs to start acting. There are 8 million Puerto Ricans, 3.5 million on the island and 4.5 million here in the United States, and their livelihoods cannot be ignored. There are ways the Obama administration and the Congress can start acting to improve the situation in Puerto Rico. First, President Obama must commit to a federal investment plan that addresses underlying fiscal issues and grows the economy with good-paying jobs. Second, Congress must eliminate federal policies that put the island at an economic disadvantage, including amending the Jones Act, which provides costly shipping requirements. Third, Congress must pass legislation to grant Puerto Rico a Chapter 9 bankruptcy option. Fourth, President Obama must convene his working group on financial markets to bring all parties to the table to negotiate a fair debt repayment and relief deal. Finally, let's be clear. Austerity is not the solution. The solution to this crisis cannot be at the expense of the working class and the most vulnerable. There's plenty of blame to go around, and everyone needs to own up to their own responsibility in this crisis. The federal government needs to own its share. The Puerto Rican government, past and present, need to own it. The Puerto Rican people need to own it, but also the hedge funds need to own it. The hedge funds cannot continue to pressure the government to protect their interests at the expense of the Puerto Rican people. They are vultures. They are feeding off of the misery of the island and of the people, and it's really dire. These same hedge funds have actively been lobbying Congress to take action, to not take action when it comes to Puerto Rico, and that is unconscionable. We need, and Puerto Rican families need, a fighting chance to care for their own without having to sacrifice even more, while the most privileged walk away unscathed. And this is what they've been doing. The hedge funds have collectively gotten together and developed an austerity plan for the island, yet they're not willing to step up to the plate and accept any responsibility for what is happening, or to even sacrifice anything on their side. This is not a privilege, it is a right for every U.S. citizen. The Puerto Rican community has contributed greatly to this nation's society, culture, armed forces, and beyond. And we will not abandon them now. At this time of need, we need to act now to save Puerto Rico. And we're standing together here and across the United States. There was a press conference this morning in D.C. There's been one in Florida as well, to deliver the strong message. When I had the opportunity to interact, although briefly, with Vice President Biden yesterday, I said Puerto Rico needs to be saved. We need this message to be consistent and to resonate across all communities across this nation. It's time for the federal government to step up and assist the Puerto Rican people at this moment of need. It is their responsibility as well. I had a couple of words in Spanish, but I would like maybe to take the time with the press afterwards, and we can definitely speak. So thank you very much for being here. This is a very important issue, and it means a lot that we have some mainstream media here as well. This is not just an issue that will be covered in Spanish press. This is an issue that needs coverage all across media, whether it's social, mainstream, etc. So thank you for being here. It really means a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker Mark Viverito. The poorest children in America live in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has half the median income of Mississippi, the poorest state in our nation. And so it is my privilege to introduce to you someone who obviously needs no introduction, but someone whose life is a challenge to inequality. Someone who understands that New York City, that there's no place in this great city for inequality and segregation. Someone who has made the struggle for equality the hallmark of his administration. A mayor for progressive New York, Mayor Bill de Blasio.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I want to thank Luis Garden Acosta for his extraordinary leadership. I've known Luis now a quarter century.
At least.
And you're one of the great progressive activists in this city. Let's thank Luis for all he is doing. We have come here today as Americans. We have come here today as New Yorkers to stand up for Puerto Rico, to stand up for our brothers and sisters, people who we care about so deeply because we feel such a strong personal tie, all of us, to the island of Puerto Rico and its people. We know that 3.5 million of our fellow citizens are right now threatened by a crisis largely created by mistakes of federal policy that now has to be corrected by federal action. If the federal government doesn't step in, it will be abandoning 3.5 million Americans who are only asking for fairness at this moment. They are saddled with a debt they cannot pay. They are unable, by law, unable to file for bankruptcy. And they are at the mercy of their creditors. This is an unacceptable situation. It's a catch-22 if we've ever seen one. And I have the honor of representing many hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans here in this city. A city that would not be as great as it is were it not for the contributions of the Puerto Rican community. And a city that feels our connection to Puerto Rico as part of our everyday life. The depth of the connection just can't be fully expressed. So we see our brothers and sisters in trouble, and it's our job to speak out, not leave them to fend for themselves. There are more Puerto Ricans living in this city than any other single place in this nation outside of Puerto Rico itself. So it's my obligation to stand up for them, and I know my colleagues here feel the exact same thing. You have leaders here, elected officials, labor leaders, faith leaders, community leaders, all agreeing, all in common cause, that we have to give Puerto Rico the tools it needs to weather this storm, and only the federal government can do that. I want to thank all who are here. I want to thank Council Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito, who has stood up early and often and powerfully on this issue. I want to thank Scott Stringer, our comptroller, Tish James, our public advocate. There's absolute singularity of purpose among us to stand up for Puerto Rico. I want to thank Bronx Democratic leader and Assembly member Marcos Crespo, Senator Gustavo Rivera, Assembly member Carmen Arroyo. I want to thank the activists. People really work to make sure that this issue gets to the forefront and stays there. I want to thank Frankie Miranda of the Hispanic Federation. I want to thank my special advisor, another friend of a quarter century, Arnie Segarra, for his good work. And labor is represented. I particularly want to thank George Miranda, the president of the Teamsters, for joining us. A lot of people care, and we will not stop until the federal government acts. Now, let's be clear. It's the federal government's obligation to act, because they can't stand idly by and watch Puerto Rico fail, especially because its circumstance has so much to do with decisions previously made by the federal government. There is a path to resolution. Pass H.R. 870, the Puerto Rico Chapter 9 Uniformity Act. It simply allows Puerto Rico to restructure its debt to do what so many other governments and so many corporations have done in their times of trouble. If we don't do it, Puerto Rico simply can't get back on its feet. We're obligated because we as Americans believe we're supposed to help our fellow Americans in times of trouble, and this is a time of trouble if ever there was one for Puerto Rico. It's no different than a natural disaster. We must be there for the people of Puerto Rico. It's a tradition that we believe in as Americans. It's certainly a tradition we believe in as New Yorkers. And we know that if Puerto Rico is allowed to fail, it will hurt this entire nation and be a tremendous injustice to the people of Puerto Rico. So we stand together in solidarity today, and we will keep making our voices heard to all our federal officials until there is fairness and action for Puerto Rico. Very quickly in Spanish. Puerto Rico está enfrentando un problema financiero muy serio. No podemos dejar a la comunidad boricua abandonada en un mar de indiferencia. Como alcalde de la ciudad con la población de boricuas más grande fuera de la isla, le pido al Congreso que apruebe una ley que permita a Puerto Rico reestructurar su deuda. Puerto Rico tiene un lugar importante en los Estados Unidos y merece la ayuda y apoyo del gobierno federal. We'll keep fighting until that day is achieved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not only can our mayor speak Spanish, but in my lifetime, we have the most diverse citywide leadership we have ever had. Latinos, blacks and whites united to lead our progressive city. A major force in that diversity, a major force in the struggle for equality, is our public advocate. May I present to you Letitia James.
Thank you. Thank you. Buenos dias. We are here today in solidarity with our Puerto Rican brothers and sisters. Puerto Rico is in an economic crisis. In fact, on August 1st, they will default on their bonds. And those suffering most are the island's working families, working men and women who had nothing to do with Puerto Rico's crisis. But leaders have refused to take action, and this is unacceptable. Our federal government has a responsibility to step in and enact an agenda that would make it possible for Puerto Rico to pay their debt in a fair and gradual process. No austere measures. Our federal government has a responsibility to eliminate policies that are in place to make it exceedingly difficult for Puerto Rico to recover from this debt crisis. Our current government and the potential future leaders of our government should remember that it takes the Puerto Rican voters to win national elections. And Puerto Rico is part of the American family, part of the New York City family, and we cannot let the island drown in debt. There are over 1 million Puerto Rican men and women living in New York City, and these are our friends and relatives of the families who are struggling overseas to support themselves in a country battling overwhelming economic turmoil. I urge the members of Congress to treat American citizens in Puerto Rico with the same respect they would treat American citizens in their own states. Today, the people across the United States are speaking out on the social and economic injustice in Puerto Rico. And I implore the federal government to listen to them, to listen to the needs of Puerto Rico, and to act. And we are calling on President Obama. First, I congratulate him on traveling to Ethiopia and Kenya. And now I urge him to turn his attention to a tiny island which is filled with also people of color. And I urge him to act, and to act now. Thank you.
Thank you, Public Advocate Ms. James. You know, Larry Shapiro of the Rockefeller Family Fund often tells me that there is no difference between Puerto Rico and Greece, except that the people in Europe actually care, that they're actually talking about resolving the issue, and they have begun to resolve the issue. Our leaders, other than the people that you see here, obviously have not either heard about the problem or don't care. One person who obviously cares about finances and understands the situation very well is, in fact, a Puerto Rican. I had supper with his mother and his Puerto Rican stepfather recently. He is none other than a major progressive force in city government, Scott Stringer, our controller.
Well, thank you very much. And yes, I am here today as the city controller, but I'm also here as somebody who has a stepfather and mom who have a home in Puerto Rico. They are there right now, and part of what their retirement security is about is their small investment in the island of Puerto Rico. And that is true for so many people, both on the island, those in New York, and those who go back and forth. Puerto Rico is in a fiscal crisis and now needs our help and support. Our friends, family, and fellow Americans, and they need this help right now. The federal government must be more flexible and creative in dealing with this crisis. This means exempting Puerto Rico from the Jones Act, which requires that ships in the domestic trade be manned by U.S. crews and be built in the U.S. Islands are hit much harder by this requirement than mainland states. The U.S. Virgin Islands aren't burdened by the Jones Act, and our friends in Puerto Rico should also be exempt. The federal government needs to restructure its Medicaid and Medicare payments to Puerto Rico to ensure the ongoing vitality of our island's healthcare system. And the feds must maximize clean water and transportation funding streams to support Puerto Rico in this crisis. Today, every state of the union, but not Puerto Rico, has the right to bankruptcy protection for its municipalities and public corporations. It's a matter of basic fairness and financial common sense. Now, back in the day, in the 1970s, when we were growing up in New York, we had a fiscal crisis. New York City was on the edge. Leaders acted, union leaders, financial leaders, elected officials. Everyone remembers the Daily News headline, Ford to New York, drop dead. We cannot create another headline, U.S. to Puerto Rico, drop dead, we don't care. That makes no sense financially. That makes no sense in terms of helping our own economy. And that is why we are here today, because we believe Puerto Rico matters to our economy and to the million Puerto Ricans in this city who were there for us back in the day when New York was on the edge of bankruptcy. When I called my mother the other day and I said, tell me what's happening in Puerto Rico, what is it like day to day? People are scared, people are worried, people don't think folks care. My mom said to me, it reminds me when we were back in the 1970s when suddenly New Yorkers felt alone. And we cannot ever put Puerto Rico in that situation. We learn from our mistakes, and I promise to work with the Puerto Rican leadership, both in Puerto Rico and in New York, to figure out a way financially to think smart and think strategic so we get the island through its greatest crisis we've ever seen. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Scott, you got my list.
Oh, my. Here, right here.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Controller Stringer. You know, as Melissa pointed out, we have press conferences in D.C. this morning, in Orlando later on today, and here. And so the president of the Hispanic Federation, Jose Calderon, was actually with Nydia Velázquez leading the press conference of Latino elected officials in Washington, D.C. He would, of course, send his salutations, but in fact, we have a special person, his deputy, Frankie, who is here to speak on behalf of the Hispanic Federation.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you, everybody. As you can see, we have a consensus. There are ways to help Puerto Rico, and we are going to continue organizing these events here in New York and in many other cities until President Obama and the Congress hear our recommendations. It is possible. It is possible, and we're going to work hard. The promise of the Hispanic Federation is to continue making these coalitions that you can see, a strong coalition. The same thing is happening in other cities, and we're going to continue doing this. La Federación Hispana está comprometida en continuar creando estas coaliciones hasta que el presidente de los Estados Unidos, el presidente Obama, el Congreso nos escuche. Hay recomendaciones y hay posibles soluciones al problema de Puerto Rico. Tenemos que actuar ahora, y también queremos hacer un llamado a los candidatos a la presidencia de los Estados Unidos del año que viene, que también sepan que existen puertorriqueños que son ciudadanos americanos que tienen que escuchar sus reclamos, porque aquellos que lo hagan van a tener entonces el favor de los puertorriqueños en las elecciones. No se puede ganar la presidencia sin el voto puertorriqueño. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Frankie Miranda. He, of course, embodies the bridge that we want to build between Puerto Rico and ourselves in New York City. But now, before we get to hearing important words from our state and city elected officials, I'd like to bring on the words of our Congresswoman, Nydia Velázquez, who I said could not be here because she's leading the Washington press conference in the form of her right hand, Evelyn Cruz.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are all Puerto Ricans. Luis Garden Acosta and our state legislators here, Speaker Melissa Mark Bevirito, our mayor, we're all together united in the call to action to the President of the United States and the United States Treasury to do the right thing. As Luis Garden Acosta stated, Congresswoman Velázquez in Washington has been working with Congressman Serrano, Congressman Luis Gutierrez, and members of the New York City delegation, along with the Senators Gillibrand and Schumer, to urge the president to do the right thing. Puerto Rico has been facing a fiscal crisis for decades. The federal taxation laws have disrupted the Puerto Rican economy for years. An outdated maritime law has disrupted negatively the commercial impact of the economy in Puerto Rico. Military bases in Vieques and Culebra have come and gone, and environmental degradation remains on our island. It is time for the President of the United States to take a stand on justice. We have millions of brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico and on the mainland, men and women who have served this nation. They deserve the right to fair and equitable access to health care, clean land, and affordable economy in Puerto Rico. So Congresswoman Velasquez has again ushered a letter to the President, and we stand firmly. We need to support Chapter 9. We need to get the U.S. Treasury to do the right thing, and we need to address maritime laws that are crippling the island of Puerto Rico. So thank you, Luis. Thank you, Hispanic Federation, and all our elected officials here for standing together. We have Puerto Ricans with us. We have those that are not Boricua with us. But today we are Latinos, we are Puerto Rican, and we're all standing for justice in the name of La Isla de Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. You know, speaking of Congresswoman Velasquez, who was the first Puerto Rican woman in the halls of Congress, we should also note that we have a very special person in our midst, the first Puerto Rican Secretary of State in the great state of New York, Lorraine Cortez Vasquez. But, yes. Speaking of the state of New York, we have none other than the chair of our caucus in Albany, the man who leads the Latino caucus in our state legislature, in the Assembly, but also who leads conferences that are focused on Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans, both in Albany and Puerto Rico. I am speaking of none other than Assemblyman Marcos Crespo.
Gracias, Luis. Thank you to the Hispanic Federation for bringing us together, and to all of the officials who stood here today to speak very clearly in one voice about the needs of the island of Puerto Rico and the people of Puerto Rico. Now, I was born in Guayama, Puerto Rico. I was raised in Arroyo as a child. Mommy still lives there. Mommy works for the local town municipality. She's the director of our town museum, always proud of the history and teaching those visitors about the history and the contributions of the Puerto Rican people to the United States of America. I'm proud to live in this country, but today that foundation is shook in my heart when I have to realize that this country, that our president, that our Congress is lending inaction, is turning their backs on the needs of their own citizenry. When we travel around the world to resolve the injustices and the needs of those at the lower end of the economic ladder, but we can't do that for our very own. If Puerto Rico is good enough to give of its best resources, its land, for American development and American industry, if it can give its best in terms of infrastructure for the American improvement and defense, and if we can give our greatest resource of all, the men and women of Puerto Rico who have shed blood, given of their lives in every single military confrontation on behalf of the United States of America, then we are good enough to be taken care of, then we are good enough to be assisted in a time of need. The fact is this, Mr. President, don't forget how you reached the Oval Office. Do not forget and don't turn your back on those of us that supported you from the very beginning. The fact is that you can say that Congress is going to get in the way of some of these measures, but there were plenty outlined today that clearly allow for you and your administration, for the Health and Human Services Office to address the needs in terms of health care, to address the needs in terms of infrastructure, to address so many of the issues that impact American citizens who are living in the most worst poverty conditions of any other American citizen across this great country. The U.S. territories in general deserve better, but nowhere is it more clear than in the needs of the island of Puerto Rico. Yo nací en Puerto Rico, mi mamá todavía vive ahí, mami todavía vive ahí. Mi hermano tuvo que salir, se fue para la Florida a buscar oportunidades. Es la historia de miles de puertorriqueños que como nunca en la historia están saliendo de la isla buscando oportunidad. Presidente Obama, no se olvide de cómo llegó a la oficina donde está, no se olvide de cómo llegó a la Casa Blanca. Fue con el apoyo hispano y el apoyo puertorriqueño. Estos son ciudadanos americanos que han dado lo mejor de sí. Sus mujeres y sus hombres han muerto en todas las guerras en defensa de esta nación. Y hoy necesitamos acción federal, no solamente para la deuda, sino también para la salud, para la necesidad de salud, el reembolso del Medicaid y Medicare, donde hay más pobreza y más utilización de esos servicios y el reembolso más bajo de cualquier comunidad americana. Necesitamos y nos merecemos acción federal.
Thank you. Thank you, Assemblyman Crespo. Assemblyman Crespo alluded to the fact of our veterans in Puerto Rico. There is no place in America that has more veterans per square inch than in Puerto Rico. And speaking of our senior citizens, I'd like to introduce to you, not a senior citizen, but we are so proud of her as the first Puerto Rican Secretary of State in the great state of New York, Lorraine Cortez Vasquez.
If you ever associate me with seniors again, you're in trouble. Thank you all for being here. This is an important issue for the United States as it is for Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico needs to get the investment required at this time. There are 8 million Puerto Ricans. And what affects one Puerto Rican of the 3.5 in Puerto Rico affects the other 4.5 that live in this country. There is a close relationship between both communities. And every elected official here needs to remember that. What happens to one Puerto Rican happens to all. What you do to my people, whether I am in the United States or whether I am in the diaspora, you do to all. Puerto Ricans can no longer be considered second-class citizens. As our speaker so eloquently said, there are 4 demands. They're very, very clear. A modification amendment to the Jones Act, the requirement to have bankruptcy, the revisiting of the Medicare expenses, the reimbursement. This economic crisis is coupled with a health crisis in Puerto Rico. Doctors are fleeing the island regularly because they're getting reimbursed 50% for Medicare, as the United States doctors are getting 100% reimbursement for Medicare expenses. Why is a doctor in Puerto Rico's services worth less? The other thing that's really important about Medicare is that the Puerto Ricans pay in Medicare exactly the same amount of money that U.S. citizens pay on the mainland for Medicare. This kind of inequitable treatment can no longer be continued. I ask you to join forces, President Obama and every elected official. Remember, Puerto Ricans are 4.5 million in the United States, and we are very present in key states. And what you do for us on the island will be reflected on what we will do for you in the next election. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorraine. You know, Donald Trump has gone to bankruptcy, some of his corporations. We all know that he is not the perfect businessman he purports to be. But he was afforded that right. Why can't the people of Puerto Rico? And now I'd like to call forward a leading state senator who will tell us also about his relationship to Puerto Rico, Gustavo Rivera.
Like my colleague, like some of my colleagues here, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. My parents are still there. I was born in Santurce, raised in Bayamón. My parents are from a little town called Comerío. Wow. And they're still there. We're here to say in a very clear and simple message. We know that there's a crisis and the reasons for it are varied, and we can be talking about them here all day. But we're here simply to say is that there is a crisis that needs to be resolved right now. There's an emergency situation. And just like when someone has to go to the emergency room, there are certain medical things that need to be done. There's triage that can be performed. And that is what we're asking for here. There's some clear basic things that both Congress and the President can do to save Puerto Rico at this particular moment. We need to do that first to stabilize the patient before we talk about how we solve it in the long term, which is also necessary. But that is what we're here to do, to say there are things that are clear that Congress can do and the President can do, and they must do. Yo soy de Puerto Rico originalmente, nací, crecí allá, mi familia todavía está allá. Y estamos aquí para decir que claramente cuando un cuando un paciente entra a un salón de emergencia, hay que hacer algo inmediatamente y después bregar con la enfermedad más a largo plazo. A corto plazo es importante, como una emergencia, detener esa sangre que está saliendo del cuerpo. Es claro que el Congreso y el presidente pueden hacer algo hoy mismo para detener esta sangre. Y eso es lo que le estamos pidiendo. So just like millions of Puerto Ricans in the island, millions of Puerto Ricans here are saying, we can and must do this. Congress can do it, the president can do it, and they must. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo. I met our next speaker in jail. We were both there protesting the Navy's bombardment for 50 years of Vieques, Puerto Rico. And we thank God for the liberation, no more bombs in Vieques. So I'd like to, and I want to be proud of my Dominican part, introduce a leading Dominican city councilman, Idanis Rodriguez, who has left. Okay, he was here. I'd like to ask a leader in New York State, who I hope is here, Carmen Arroyo. Okay.
Este no me conoce. He doesn't know me, but he's not going to know me now. I am the first Puerto Rican woman ever elected to one state assembly in United States of America. I represent the district, the state assembly district that house more Puerto Ricans in the state of New York. And today, I'm not going to repeat what was said before. But I'm going to ask my brothers and sisters, Puerto Ricans and Hispanics, to embrace each other and send emails to the office of the President of the United States. He doesn't want to listen. We have to make him listen. As Puerto Ricans, we have the right to do that. Si el presidente de los Estados Unidos, que está allí con el voto de nosotros también, si ha puesto sordo ante las necesidades que está viviendo la isla de Puerto Rico, vamos a llenarle sus canales de mensajes diciéndole que está equivocado y que demandamos que él defenda la posición de Puerto Rico y nos tenemos que abrazar mutuamente para hacer esto. Gracias, que Dios le bendiga y quiero darle las gracias a la Federación Hispana por esta oportunidad.
Carmen, I'm so apologetic. You know, I'm from Brooklyn, and all I know of this lady is that she's a legend. And so when I saw this young woman behind me, I had no idea it was the Carmen Arroyo. So, sorry. But now let me get out of this by introducing a major leader in the New York State Assembly, Assemblyman Robert Rodriguez.
Thank you. It feels a little bit like Puerto Rico here today. This is an important conversation that we're having now where we're really demanding some sort of fairness and equity for the citizens of Puerto Rico who are American citizens. There are more American citizens in Puerto Rico than 21 states. Yet we don't have the same protections to be able to restructure our debt like Detroit. It's about fairness. When we talk about the little things that can be done to change the course of what we know is a crisis occurring in Puerto Rico now, it's about treating the American citizens in Puerto Rico fairly, giving them the opportunity to get the same level of Medicaid reimbursement as citizens in the mainland, being able to pay the same price for goods and services as other American citizens that are not required to deal with antiquated maritime laws that raise costs 50 to 100%. This is about fairness and equity. This is about the millions of people in Puerto Rico who are asking for assistance from the federal government to create a fair and equitable solution to this crisis. As American citizens, we deserve that opportunity. So as elected officials, we are coming together to encourage the federal government and make sure that across this country that no conversation about the future of Puerto Rico is being had without talking about solutions to this problems. And when we talk about electoral politics and the Hispanic vote, the Hispanic vote, in my opinion, comes through Puerto Rico and the citizens both in the island and in the mainland who have to make decisions about the future of our home nation. So with that, please support Puerto Rico, and I encourage you all to encourage those candidates in 2016 to talk about Puerto Rico as well.
Thank you, Assemblyman Rodriguez. Yeah, it's hard for me to see at times. But I hope you all remember the great Dennis Rivera, who led this city and perhaps had more to do with the election of our first black mayor than anybody else. SEIU 1199 has always been with us in every aspect of our struggle and is a major member of our coalition that put together these press conferences. And so I would love to have Shirley give us a few words from the SEIU perspective.
Thank you. I'm here representing SEIU, Local 32BJ. Hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans have strong roots in the labor movement, both here and in Puerto Rico. Many of our memberships throughout the labor movement are Puerto Rican. And whether you were born here or born there and migrated here, it doesn't matter. We have very, very strong roots and a strong commitment to the viability of our island. The U.S. government must act immediately and stop the idea of these austerity measures that will only plummet working families and working people who are already on the brink of poverty further into despair. One thing that the labor movement knows how to do is organize. And we are committed to organize the hundreds and thousands of Puerto Ricans who have migrated here to the United States, to places like Central Florida, to vote in next year's elections. And we encourage the federal government to look forward to us organizing workers, Puerto Rican people, and the Latino community as a whole next year. So really, really look hard at what you plan to do for the Puerto Rican people now, because we are committed to fight, and fight we will. Thank you.
We know that there's a major force organizing the poor in this city. We used to know it by another name, but today they are called the New York Communities for Change. Let me present to you a representative of them, Carlos Ruiz.
Thank you everyone for coming out here on this hot day. I'm a proud New York Communities for Change member. I'm a proud New Yorker, but first and foremost, I'm a proud Puerto Rican, born and raised in the islands. I am furious to hear that billionaire hedge fund managers have brought up large chunks of Puerto Rican debt at discount prices, pushed the island to borrow more, and are dividing towards devastating measures, honesty measures. For almost 2 decades, Puerto Ricans have been stuck in economic sanctioning. Puerto Ricans face regular electrical and power shortage. 41% of Puerto Ricans already live in poverty. The situation is not simple, but it is something that certainly should not involve reducing minimum wage to $2.42 an hour. That's right. Current former IMF employees suggest lowering Puerto Rico's minimum wage by a third, reducing vacation days, overtime hours, and paid sick days for government employees, slashing Medicare and welfare benefits. Puerto Ricans already have suffered. We cannot let them suffer anymore. The government has implemented measures to stave off financial crisis, including reducing pension payments, raising property taxes, small business taxes, increasing water and gas prices, laying off government workers. We here in America and New York must continue to fight for Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico cannot stand an economic crisis. I want to thank everyone for being here, and viva Puerto Rico!
And now, very quickly, I want to introduce to you a representative of another great organizing, fighting force for the entire city of New York, Make the Road New York, Maria Cortez.
Muy buenas tardes a todos. ¿Cómo se encuentran el día de hoy? Bien. Soy puertorriqueña y soy miembro de la organización comunitaria Hacerse Camino en Nueva York. Semanas atrás, el gobernador Alejandro García Padilla anunció que mi isla de Puerto Rico no puede pagar su deuda de 72,000 millones de dólares. Déjenme decirles que esta crisis financiera ha sido años de fabricación. Hay muchos factores que llevaron a este punto y hay culpa para repartir. Lo que ha resultado de todo esto es la extrema pobreza y la inmigración masiva en la última década a lugares como Nueva York y la Florida Central, reduciendo la base de impuestos. Si mi isla no recibe apoyo del gobierno federal, tendrá que negociar un acuerdo con sus acreedores. En un vacío caótico, lo que sé es que esos jugadores fiscales están buscando extraordinarias riquezas y poder a expensas de todos los demás. Las medidas de austeridad que se recomiendan hacen forzar a la clase trabajadora a llevar esta carga. El impuesto sobre las ventas ya ha subido a un 11.5% y más aumentos de impuestos están siendo empujados para octubre. Señores, además existen recomendaciones para reducir el salario mínimo, el pago de horas extras, los días de enfermedad y pensiones para los trabajadores. Luchas que ya han sido ganados por la clase trabajadora. Esto es inaceptable o golpea a la clase trabajadora de Puerto Rico más que a nadie. Es tiempo de que el presidente Obama y el Congreso actúe ahora. Nuestros líderes deben oponerse a estas severas medidas de austeridad y comprometerse a un plan de inversión federal que fortalezca nuestra economía. Mi isla no debe ser el único responsable de la deuda de 72,000 millones de dólares. Muchas gracias y el pueblo sí, hedge fund no. El pueblo sí, hedge fund no. El pueblo sí.
Hedge funds no.
Gracias.
Gracias, Maria. Bien dicho. And now I want to introduce you to a remarkable activist because he's an organizing force unto himself. But today, he is proudly representing his union, CSEA Local 1000, my friend and our partner, David Galarza.
I'm also here with the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement, and our president, Angel Acosta, is here with us as well, and board member Victor Rivera. So thank you for also being here. And members, Nelly, of course. There's an expression in Puerto Rico, cada guaraguao tiene su pitire. Have you heard that?
Yes.
When in Puerto Rico we see a small bird pursuing and tormenting a larger bird, especially a guaraguao, the odds are 10 to 1 that that small bird is a pitire, right? The guaraguao is a hawk. The pitire is a kingbird. When the predatory guaraguao invades the territory of the pitire, this 2-ounce little bird defends her young in the nest with such ferocity that the startled hawk dives away in retreat. What this expression literally means, ladies and gentlemen, is that every hawk has his kingbird. Every Goliath has his David. In Puerto Rico, it seems like there's an infestation of hedge fund vultures, not guaraguaos, but not unlike the guaraguaos. This morning I read about their plan to close schools and fire teachers so they can collect their money. They're not just vultures. Anyone that preys on children and teachers are also punks of the worst kind. They've done the same thing in Detroit. They've done the same thing in Greece. They've done the same thing in Spain. They've done the same thing in Argentina and cities across this land. Yet, despite the historic and lamentable exodus of Boricuas from our beloved island, there are still 3.5 million pitires living in Puerto Rico, another 5 million living in the diaspora, and we have countless numbers of allies. Are we going to allow these hedge fund vulture guaraguaos to continue to attack our beloved island? No! Are we going to fight back?
Yes!
History has shown us that when we get together, we come together as a community, we can bring down any guaraguao. We've done it with Vieques and Culebra. We've done it with the gasoducto. We've done it with the Puerto Rican political prisoners. And ladies and gentlemen, we will set Oscar Lopez free. Yes. Indeed, many solutions and suggestions have or will be mentioned in the days and weeks ahead. I may personally not agree with a lot of them, especially those that would lead to further austerity and taxing and burdening of the people in Puerto Rico into oblivion. But one solution that I and many have come to see as a no-brainer in repairing Puerto Rico's economy is the repeal of the Jones Act, also known as the cabotage law. This unfair and outdated law that makes billions for the shipping cartels while robbing the Puerto Rican people blind. There are many sustainable solutions that have been proposed and tried by the people of Puerto Rico, from the mountains of the mountains of Adjuntas to the placitas of Santurce. Find the answers to this crisis in the streets of our pueblos, not Wall Street. We already know where they've led us. Finally, I would be remiss, if I didn't challenge President Obama and this Congress. If you don't want us, if you don't feel compelled to assist the world's oldest colony, do us all a favor, and in the unforgettable words of Leela James, set us free. The United Nations has already demanded as much for decades. So with that I say, Puerto Rico no se vende, Puerto Rico se defiende. Gracias.
Thank you, David, and for those wonderful words, especially those of Lena Horne. I would like to introduce last, we want to get to questions and answers, but certainly not least, an amazing organizer. I am proud to say he's an alumni of El Puente. He's also an alumni of Make the Road, so they shouldn't be jealous. But he is now the co-executive director of Churches United for Fair Housing. Excuse me, Jose Gonzalez. Thank you. I'm sorry, Jesus Gonzalez. I needed my breath. Yeah.
My beautiful people. I'll be very brief. I just want to echo the same urgency that all the speakers here have delivered the same message. Just also want to be clear that as we talk about the financial crisis in Puerto Rico, to be clear, whose debt is that? It's not Puerto Rico's debt. There's vulture hedge funds that are functioning in Puerto Rico. It's the same predatory practices that drove the foreclosure crisis here in New York. It's the same thing. Money over people. Are we going to take that?
No.
We're here to fight back. We're here to demand that President Obama take action, that Congress take action, and save Puerto Rico now. Thank you, y'all.
Thank you, Jesus. And now we would entertain questions and answers. Any questions? Yes. The Hispanic Federation, yes. Yes, absolutely.
How long have you guys been planning the demonstration?
About a couple of weeks. We met together in an emergency meeting a week ago last Monday. Yep.
Other questions?
There's got to be some questions.
Once, twice?
Don't you think it's crazy that U.S. citizens should be treated this way? Don't you think that Jim Crow is something of the past? That third-class citizenship should not be honored or sanctioned in any way, and yet that is the case of Puerto Rico.
Yesterday, my understanding.
No, actually, he committed.
Think about it for a while,
He committed
right?
last week. Yeah,
So.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't remember, but I got the message last week that he was coming.
And by the way, this is his first time being at a press conference on the steps as mayor, but it wasn't his own press conference, so it's a big deal as well.
Right.
Question.
Yes.
I have a comment more than a question.
Uh-huh.
My name is Carmen Santana, and I am the author of a petition asking President Obama to honor Arturo Alfonso Schomburg, a black Puerto Rican that actually most people know of the Schomburg Center in Harlem.
Okay.
And one of the things that Arturo Alfonso Schomburg gave was not only to the United States, but to the entire world, black history. And just like Arturo Schomburg, there have been other great Puerto Ricans and other riches that Puerto Rico has given to the United States that go unnoticed every day. And I'm asking the president myself, not only to honor Puerto Rico by defending what he's supposed to do, because that's what he's supposed to do, stand up for the Puerto Rican stand, but also do it through honoring someone who gives to the entire world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more questions? I'm sorry? I want to reiterate, Puerto Rico is the poorest sector in the United States. It has the poorest children in all of America. They are U.S. citizens, half the median income of Mississippi, the poorest state of New York. To cut support for our young people, to cut our schools is unconscionable. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks everybody for hanging in there.
Yeah, in this heat. Thank you. Thank you. Ah, sí, cómo no. Claro que sí. ¿Lo quieres?